Texas took down Tennessee in a matchup between two of the 7 SEC teams in the top 25. What's behind the incredible play around the SEC this season? Locked On Women's Basketball starts now.
You are Locked On Women's Basketball, your daily podcast on women's basketball. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and happy Friday. You are Locked On to Women's Basketball. I'm Natalie Heavren, and I'm a features writer and the Atlantic 10 beat reporter for The Next. From the first whistle to the final drive, FanDuel makes the NFL playoffs even more exciting. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $300 in bonus bets if you win your first bet. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Today, we'll chat all about the SEC, including Texas taking down Tennessee last night. We'll talk Alabama, Vanderbilt, and Kentucky, as well as talk about tonight's matchup between LSU and South Carolina and what to look forward to as the rest of this SEC season plays out. Joining me today is the Next SEC beat writer, Wilton Jackson. So I don't know about you, but I feel like I've just started breathing again after last night's nail-biter between Tennessee and Texas. Too many lead changes to count, but it was Texas that came out with the 80-76 win. What were your takeaways from the game?
Natalie, I mean, you really just kind of hit it off, right off the top. I mean, it was 15 lead changes to be exact. So, I mean, I'm like you, I had to catch my breath too. But this game pretty much went exactly how I thought it would. A tight back and forth affair between two really good, well-coached teams that basically sit in interesting spots, within the SEC play just thus far. If you're Texas, since that loss to South Carolina, obviously the Longhorns have bounced back. They had wins against Auburn and a big win against Maryland, but I wanted to see how Texas will respond against a big, obviously blue blood team in the SEC in Tennessee, and they responded well. And I think, to your point in terms of some of those takeaways, I think the biggest takeaway for me was the interior presence of Kyla Oaker, Taylor Jones, and Aaliyah Moore, which is something I said that would be a big factor for Texas going up against Tennessee. As you saw in the latter half of that game, and specifically toward the final minutes, Texas kept coming up with scoring opportunities in the paint, and then also getting strong rebounds from Aaliyah Moore and also Taylor Jones. I mean, my gosh, like Taylor Jones' presence in the paint from her scoring ability, just her knack of understanding where the ball is and when to score and when to get rebounds. And the same for Aaliyah Moore. You probably heard on the broadcast yesterday when they were talking about this is a different Texas team when Aaliyah Moore is on the court, it was very important because I know she was dealing with some foul trouble yesterday in the latter part of the game. So her being on the court, being able to get those rebounds, that was a big thing for Texas. And I know we're going to get into some other things with this game, but specifically before we get into that, with Tennessee, this was a game that I felt like they really needed, considering that, they've had some close losses. And literally, this was a Tennessee team that didn't shoot the ball bad yesterday. They shot the ball pretty well. I think, if I'm not mistaken, they shot at least 50% from three. But the little things, this is what Coach Kim Caldwell was talking about leading up to this game, rebounding consistently, especially in critical moments. Who won that the rebounding category? Who won the second chance points category? Both of those categories went to Texas. And so a lot of times when you're talking about what teams are going to be able to win games, you have to win those categories.
Yeah, I completely agree. I was really impressed last night by not only Taylor Jones, as you mentioned, but also I cannot stop watching Madison Booker. She's just so dynamic to watch. What do you think is the ceiling for this year's Texas team?
When you look at Texas, and to your first point, Madison Booker, shout out to Madison Booker from Mississippi. That's where I'm from. Got a chance to watch her in high school when she played here. Her mid-range game is phenomenal, but but more than anything beyond just the mid-range game, her ability to score at all three levels, and when she's clicking, she's on. And when you think about this Texas team, the ability or how far I see them going in terms of their ceiling, it really kind of depends on her as a big part, but then also in terms of some of the other players that are navigating this team as well. Obviously, solid point guard play from Roy Harmon. It's a blessing. And Coach Schaefer has talked about this, like having a point guard with that type of veteran experience in critical moments to be able to lead your team. But I think more so this team goes as far as obviously Booker, Harmon, and the post players that you have in Taylor Jones and also Aaliyah Moore. And also don't sleep on the fact of the impact from Jordan Lee, someone who can also score the ball when need to, and also being able to be in the right places at the right time.
Yeah, definitely. Switching gears a little bit to Tennessee, last night, head coach Kim Caldwell wasn't at the helm after giving birth to her son. We're not sure how long she'll be away from the sideline. Does this change anything for Tennessee moving forward in SEC play?
Natalie, I don't think that it does. And before I even get into this, congrats to Coach Caldwell. Her and her husband Justin have a son now, Connor Scott Caldwell. Anytime you bring a new life into the world, that's a big thing. It's a very important thing. But I think that what you saw last night with Tennessee, this is a game that they could have won. And with the assistant coach and someone like Jenna Burdett, kind of leading into this game, they were talking about how the coaches have come together for a series of meetings to make sure that this team is staying on task and on course and improving the things that they need to improve on in terms of, rebounding in critical moments and making sure they're getting defensive stops and not going on lulls in terms of scoring. And so I think that although they dealt with some of those same things in yesterday's game, I think as long as Coach Burdett is continuing to lead this team in the right direction, I think they're going to be fine. Granted, it's always one thing when your head coach is not on the sideline with you. And of course, from a distance, Coach Caldwell will still be coaching for now. But I don't see any issues from the standpoint of that this is still going to be a really, really talented Tennessee team. It's just a matter of them fixing the little things that, again, Coach Caldwell had already talked about to see how far they can actually go in a really, really jam-packed SEC this year.
Yeah, you've touched on it a little bit, but all 4 of Tennessee's conference losses have come by, I believe, 4 points or less. Is there anything other than fixing those little things that you think need to be made in terms of adjustments to get them over the hump in those close games?
Natalie, you just said it. It's literally the little things like boxing out, getting rebounds. I mean, I just told you even in the first part of this segment, who won the battle in second chance points? Who won the battle in rebounds? Both of those categories went to Texas. If you're Tennessee, you just saw against Vanderbilt a second chance point essentially from Michaela Blake's gets a win for Vanderbilt. So you have to be able to fix those things. Like it's simple as a person. I can remember as a kid, you're going through those box out drills playing basketball. And I'm thinking like, I absolutely hate box out drills. But now as I've gotten older and understand the game more and how it's supposed to be, those little things really, really, really do matter because that could be the difference in a Michaela Blake's last second bucket for a win for Vanderbilt versus a Tennessee loss. So I think that as long as they continue to, improve on those things and get better, I think Tennessee's going to be fine.
I know Kim Caldwell may not be back on the sideline for some time. We're still not sure about that. But what has she brought to the team this season? And how is this Tennessee team different from the Tennessee teams we've seen in the last few years?
Well, I think when you look at Coach Caldwell, just her philosophy on the game, right? Obviously when you get a coach like Coach Caldwell, you're going to get a press. You're going to get that full court pressure that you get from her teams. And you've seen it already with Tennessee. And it's been dominant. They force different opposing opponents into turnovers. You're going to get a bunch of three-pointers. Obviously, one of the best three-point shooting teams in the country. Even last night, like I said, they shot at least 50% from three. So it wasn't that their shooting wasn't great last night. It was the little things that they didn't do. And so I think that when you start talking about this level of play from Caldwell's teams versus, some of the other Tennessee teams, I think that those are the things that you get from her that are really transforming what Tennessee basketball looks like now. Obviously, we know the legends and the history that stands through this Vols program, but Kim Caldwell is definitely putting her stamp on this program. But it's just a matter of coming together and this team coming together and still putting those little things together to take a really, really good program to an extremely great program in her first season under the helm.
Yeah. Do you think she is doing that a little bit more quickly than maybe people expected this season?
Absolutely. I think that, obviously from her background, coming from a smaller conference, sometimes you never know how it's going to pan out on the next level, especially when you're going from more of a smaller conference to a bigger conference. And we could arguably say, some people might disagree with me and say that the SEC is not the most dominant conference in women's college basketball. But I mean, the slogan says it best. It just means more. But I mean, it's just like I think that her ability to, have this team where it is right now in her first season, I think that some people were a little bit more shocked. I'm not necessarily shocked. I just want to see that now that they're in this spot, how far can they continue to go to improve? Are they going to be able to continue to improve on those little things that really solidify themselves as a top 4 team in the SEC? or they're going to be a little bit below the top 4 teams, so maybe a top 6 team. Because when I look at the SEC now, with it being 16 teams, I look at it as tiers, like tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, tier 4. So right now, Tennessee is obviously not in that tier 1 in terms of their records and how they play right now. They're not in that tier 1 category, but it's a lot of season still left, Natalie. You still have the rest of this month and all of February before you get into the conference tournament. So there is a chance that obviously Coach Caldwell can put this team together to be ready and really continue to shock some people as we continue to get into February and later into March.
Awesome. Well, coming up next, we'll take a deeper dive into some of those other SEC teams in Alabama, Vanderbilt, and Kentucky. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. From the first whistle to the final drive, FanDuel makes the NFL playoffs even more exciting. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $300 in bonus bets if you win your first bet. That's $300 to keep the action going. The FanDuel app is easy to navigate, and the variety of bets keeps every game exciting. Plus, when you win, you get paid instantly. No waiting around for your winnings. Whether you're betting on your favorite team or just looking to add some extra excitement to the playoffs, FanDuel has you covered. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today and get started with $300 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com. Make this playoff season unforgettable with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Okay, so I saw Alabama back in December when they played against Richmond and was really impressed by their three-point shooting, particularly from Aaliyah Nye. Essence Cody also really impressed me. How have they been able to take another step forward this year?
I think when you look at this Alabama team, under the leadership of Christy Curry, this is a veteran team, and you just named a couple players, specifically Aaliyah Nye. Sharp shooting. If you like sharp shooting from beyond the arc, look at Aaliyah Nye. She has been excellent this season and has especially stepped up in the absence of Sara Ashley Barker, who was their second leading scorer, who's dealing with a injury currently right now. But beyond just Aaliyah Nye, you can't not talk about Alabama with not talking about Zay Green. You're talking about the transfer from Arkansas Pine Bluff a year ago. She has been lights out this season, obviously playing more point guard. When she was at Arkansas Pine Bluff, she kind of played off the ball a little bit more. So, but now she's playing more point guard. Her handle has gotten better in terms of being a true point guard, but her shooting ability, her playmaking ability has been strong. And I think that this is a dangerous Alabama team where they're all clicking together. But I will not lie to you and tell you that, I'm sometimes a little worried because they are in absence of Sara Ashley Barker. But for now, it hasn't been the biggest of difference. But we'll see what this Alabama team will look like as the weeks continue to come on.
Yeah, and do you think there's anything left to prove for Alabama as the season continues, and especially while they wait for Sara Ashley Barker to come back from injury?
Well, I think, in the SEC and really any conference, but specifically the SEC, there's always something to prove because you have to be ready and prepared to go against any team at any point in time. I mean, just look at last night between Texas A&M and Kentucky, and Texas A&M gets that upset against Kentucky. Alabama still has a lot to prove. This is a team that, started in the top 25 to begin the season. Still a top 25 team, but this Alabama team gives me a different feel from in previous years, mainly due to the fact of some of the players we just mentioned and just their continuity that they're playing with each other. That's why it kind of irritates me a little bit slightly that we're not seeing, obviously Sara Ashley Barker in this mix with the players they have because of, obviously you have in Essence Cody, you have Diana Collins, you have some other pieces that Coach Curry has that when they are clicking well, and they can score the basketball. I think more so than anything, it's about the longevity, the bench play, what that's going to look like for the Crimson Tide, and then just the nature of the teams that's in the SEC that they have to go up against. Obviously, they didn't have the best outcome in going up against South Carolina, but obviously we know South Carolina is a truly that's a different breed, a juggernaut of the SEC per se. But I think they definitely still have a lot to prove. And whether or not Sara Ashley Barker comes back or not, I think by by the middle portion of February, and even toward the end of February, we're going to see a solid Alabama team that's going to be ready for the tournament.
And then, switching gears to Vanderbilt, I had to make sure that I was reading this right when I was, preparing for this episode. Vanderbilt has not one, but two players averaging more than 20 points a game. Can you talk more about them and how they're able to both find so much success scoring the ball?
Absolutely. I have been talking about Vanderbilt more so for probably the last 2.5, 3 weeks. If you haven't heard of these two players yet, you need to listen. You need to go watch their tape. Camille Pierre, Michaela Blakes. Camille Pierre, if you like scoring, she can score in all phases. I watched that game against Vanderbilt and LSU really closely. Not only was she able to make mid-range jump shots, she was able to basically maneuver her way around the low block against some of the best. Obviously, Anisha Morrow, it doesn't get any better than that in terms of, her presence in the paint. She was able to score and still be dominant. And, of course, Michaela Blakes, a freshman, who can score it pretty much anywhere on the court. And the thing is, like, these two players for Vanderbilt under the direction of Shea Ralph, they're really starting to come together. A lot of people probably thought that when they played LSU that was going to be a blowout. But this is a team that's constantly building its continuity with itself. And they have some other pieces to go along with what they have in Camille Pierre and Michaela Blakes that could really shake some things up as it gets to, again, the middle portion of February. Because here's what we know, Natalie. Basketball, non-conference play is always important. We know that for sure. January is important. February, this is like, okay, it's time to play. Like, this is where you start separating these are your great teams. Here are your good teams. And then pretty much there's everybody else. Vanderbilt has a chance if they can continue to play and build on this continuity and this momentum that they have right now with the scores that they have. This is a dangerous Vanderbilt team that Shea Ralph, believe it or not, kind of alluded to us in the SEC when we went to SEC tip-off back in Birmingham, that could be very dangerous and very different from any team that she's coached in previous years. So I'm excited to see what they're cooking in Nashville.
Yeah, me too. But, we also have to talk about Kentucky, who looks like a totally different team this season in its first year under Kenny Brooks. Can you talk more about what he's brought to Kentucky this season and how he's been able to turn the program around so quickly?
Absolutely. So when you talk about Kenny Brooks, there's a certain level of coaching and style and grace that's going to come with him. This is a Kentucky team that lost a lot of players to the transfer portal, but also brought in a lot of players. So now, obviously, he has, it doesn't get any better than having a player like Claire Strock. Of course, you're going to have Georgia Amore. You have Amelia Hassett. You have Tiani Key. You have Deja Lawrence. This starting lineup, these group of players have been excellent. Now, you talk about teams that have been somewhat of a surprise coming into this season. I don't think people thought that Kentucky was going to be as good as it's been so far. However, it's crazy because we were talking about this, yesterday preparing for the show, Natalie. We were talking about I was telling you about the fact that, like, some people kind of look at Kentucky's success early in the season outside of non-conference play, specifically in conference play. They haven't really played anybody yet because, some of their I go back and look at my notes from yesterday. The games that they won in conference play, their record was their combined record of the teams that they beat was like 4-14. So you get a Texas A&M team on a Thursday night in College Station, an Aggies team that's really, really good at home. And if you're Kentucky, you have the worst shooting night that you could possibly have. Like, this is a Kentucky team that has been shooting the ball exceptionally well from beyond the arc. I think they made, one three-pointer last night? I think it was 1 or 2 three-pointers last night. And so when you combine that with the athleticism that a Texas A&M team has, you're talking about a Soleil Williams, you're talking about a Lauren Ware. Literally, Lauren Ware's performance in the latter part of that game was phenomenal. Like, Kentucky had no answer for her presence in the paint, specifically in that fourth quarter when she kept getting rebounds and the ability to score. And literally, I just think that when you talk about this Kentucky team, very talented. I can just remember a couple of weeks back talking to Coach Brooks, and he was talking about Claire Strock and saying that, she was probably the best passer, best post passer in the country. And her ability to also score as well. And this is a very, very long Kentucky team. However, they also have weaknesses. As you can see last night, they're long, and they came in averaging if I'm not mistaken, the most amount of the most blocks or leading the country in blocks this season. But this was a Texas A&M team that was energized and really met their energy on the court in that game. So, this is a Kentucky team that now, having lost to Texas A&M, I'll be really interested to see how they bounce back, especially as their schedule will have some other, of course, ranked matches, and then just some teams that are not necessarily ranked in the SEC, but could potentially give them challenges, especially when you start talking about other athletic teams going down the stretch of the season.
Yeah, definitely. Really excited to see how all of that plays out. But coming up next, we'll chat all about what you should be looking out for as the SEC season continues, but especially that LSU South Carolina game tonight. Today's episode is brought to you by Talkspace. Therapy is a game changer. It can help you manage stress, improve sleep, and communicate more effectively. But finding the right therapist and fitting sessions into a busy schedule can be a challenge. That's where Talkspace comes in. Talkspace, the leading virtual therapy provider, makes getting the help you need easy, accessible, and affordable. With Talkspace, signing up is simple. You can match with a licensed therapist who fits your needs, usually within 48 hours, and it's convenient. You can have sessions from the comfort of your home and even message your therapist between appointments. Plus, Talkspace is covered by many insurance plans, and for most insured members, there's a $0 copay. It's never been easier to prioritize mental health. As a listener of this podcast, you'll get $80 off your first month with Talkspace when you go to Talkspace.com/LockedOnNBA and enter promo code SPACE80. To match with a licensed therapist today, go to Talkspace.com/LockedOnNBA and enter promo code SPACE80 to get $80 off your first month and show your support for the show. That's Talkspace.com/LockedOnNBA, promo code SPACE80. Okay, so, we're looking at the schedule. This game got moved because of some snow in the South. A sentence I'm not sure that I thought I would be saying ever on this podcast. But what are you most excited to see in the LSU South Carolina game tonight? For me, I'm interested to see if Kim Mulkey and LSU can defeat Dawn Staley and South Carolina for the first time since Mulkey took over in 2021.
So this is, you talk about star power in women's college basketball. You're going to get star power in this game. Obviously, with LSU, it's no secret. Anissa Morrow, LSU goes as Anissa Morrow goes, Michaela Williams, and then also Flajay Johnson. I mean, the big three for LSU, and then of course some of the other players that they have as well that can go. And then with South Carolina, you have a Joyce Edwards, you have a Bree Hall, you have a Raven Johnson. You have a Sanaya Fagan, like Tessa Johnson. Like these are, you talk about star power, this is what you're going to see. But specifically when you start talking about this game, I'm interested to see for South Carolina, and it's pretty much been the main storyline since Ashlyn Watkins went out with the ACL injury. What is South Carolina's presence going to look like in the post against someone like Anissa Morrow, who literally grabs essentially nearly every rebound that comes off the rim, right? So what is that going to look like? Will Sanaya Fagan, will Joyce Edwards, a freshman who's been playing phenomenally throughout this season, will she be able to, go toe-to-toe with a player like Anissa Morrow? And then you start talking about from a guards play with Raven Johnson, in terms of, with Michaela at LSU, and then Flajay and what she's able to do. So I'm interested to see, will LSU be able to get back in transition to score points? Will South Carolina be able to use transition to score points as well? What would their defense, what would LSU's defense look like against South Carolina from a standpoint of from the 3-point line? Because obviously we know Tahina Powell is always locked and loaded and ready to hit threes for South Carolina, which could be a big thing for them in this game should South Carolina not be able to rebound like it typically does, in terms of that. Like if they're not able to get those second chance points like they typically do, will that create opportunities to where it gives opportunities for someone like Tahina Powell to score from beyond the arc, and then also just being able to find other ways to score, specifically more so in transition in that regard.
And then, I know it's only January and we've talked, there's so much more basketball to play, but how important would a win be for each of these teams?
I think it'll be a big win for both teams. I think this win would be a little bit bigger, more so likely for LSU than South Carolina, because obviously we know the struggles LSU has had and not being able to beat South Carolina, for a while now. And so I think that where we are right now at the end part of January, knowing the history between these two teams, the matchups that we've seen, this win would be much bigger for LSU, mainly due to the fact that, everybody talks about the play of LSU's non-conference schedule and how it's not always as strong. And again, this is Kim Mulkey's way of how she plans her schedule. But LSU has still found a way through SEC play. Again, still one of two undefeated teams remaining in the country. So, and they've been doing that against, SEC competition. It's some very, very tight, close games. One of those games being that win against Vanderbilt. But I think that getting a win against South Carolina would almost kind of put them, they're already in that tier one level of teams, but it will really give them that extra stamp to say, okay, we've beat the champs. We've dethroned the champs in January. Doesn't mean we won't see them again, because clearly that could potentially, be a landing spot, obviously for the SEC tournament, but it gives them almost that stamp of approval of this is a serious LSU team that not only has already beaten quality opponents in SEC play, but they beat the top opponent in SEC play. And what level of confidence does this give Kim Mulkey's program, obviously going into February and in the 1st of March? And if you're South Carolina, I think that oftentimes you hear Coach Dawn Staley talking about, how her teams have been different. Like last year's team was different in terms of how they play, their personalities and things like that. Well, this year's team is a little bit different too, still. And then obviously with the loss of Ashton Watkins, and you're still basically, your depth is the biggest thing that you have. With Sanaya Fagan and Joyce Edwards and just the other players, Bree Hall, Tessa Johnson, who we've seen can go off at any point in time, just doesn't necessarily get the minutes per se that, maybe other players across the country get. And then, of course, Malaysia for a while, a walking highlight, you know what I mean? So being able to get a win against LSU would really just kind of further solidify that when people thought that South Carolina was about to take a step down after that loss to UCLA, they're still continuing to build. And this is truly the dominance that we're seeing from Dawn Staley in the South Carolina Gamecocks program.
And then, stepping back a little bit, the SEC just seems a little extra fun and exciting this year. What do you think is behind just the tremendous play, but also 7 teams in the top 25?
Well, it's not far-fetched to have that many teams in the top 25, but I think more so than anything, the exciting part is just when you get to SEC play, Natalie, like it gets gritty. It gets hard. Like, how we look in non-conference play, say the very first game of the season, right? USC, Ole Miss. Great game to start the season. Of course, you're going to have those matchups with UConn. You're going to have the UCLA top-tier games. You're going to have the top-tier games from Ohio State. In the Big Ten. But I think that when you start talking about SEC play, like you get so much star power on any given night, and these teams are motivated, they're thrilled, they're encouraged behind trying to get wins, essentially. Like if you look at the SEC, one team we haven't talked about, and we probably won't talk about much in this episode, like one of the top, I think she's the top 4, top 5 leading scorer in the nation at Arkansas, and Izzy Higginbottom. Arkansas has won 1 conference game this season in SEC play, but Izzy Higginbottom is a walking bucket. She can score in all ways on the court, but Arkansas is not winning any games. However, even though they're not winning games, when you play Arkansas, you better know that Izzy Higginbottom is probably going to drop at least 20 or 25 on you, and that's just what it is. When you look at Vanderbilt, again, another non-ranked team right now, getting votes, of course, in the AP poll weekly, but like you better know where Camille Pierre is on the court. You better know where Michaela is on Michaela Bucks on the court. And you think about Ole Miss, another team that's not ranked, started the season ranked, but for those that may not have understood or haven't been watching Rebels basketball, Sirachinu is a freshman that doesn't look like a freshman. Like, so I say all that to say, in using those examples, there is a wide range of talent within the SEC, as it has always been in previous years, but this year it just seems a little bit more. And then, of course, the elephant in the room, Oklahoma and Texas. Madison Booker. I love Madison Booker. I love her game. I love what she's able to do. And Oklahoma, a team that obviously has Reagan Beers, Peyton Verhulst, like talk about sharpshooters. She's a bucket as well. So you think about all this extra talent between Texas and Oklahoma, and just the additional talent that we're seeing in, the parity of SEC women's basketball, but even at large from just women's college basketball in general. I think that's what makes it the most exciting.
Awesome. Well, what are some SEC games that our listeners and me as well should have circled on their calendar for the rest of SEC play?
So when I look at the calendar, and I'm pulling it up as we talk, I look at certain schedules like Alabama, right? This is January 24th. Alabama has a game against Vanderbilt that they have on Sunday, and then they have Kentucky. So those are some games coming up at the end part of January. But then on the latter part, the back end of February, they have a stretch where they have not the back end, but somewhat the middle, starting on February 9th. They have a road game against Mississippi State, Texas A&M, Tennessee, Auburn, and then they end the season with like LSU and Oklahoma. So if you're Alabama, you talk about a program that I hope to see continue to build on this momentum that they've had this season. They have a tough stretch going into the end of the season. And then, when you start talking about some of the other programs like an LSU, they have Texas A&M on Sunday, and then turn around, they have Oklahoma on January 30th. But then when you start talking about, again, that latter part of February, the middle portion of February, Tennessee on February 9th, February 16th at Texas, and then they end the season at Kentucky, at Alabama, and a home game against Ole Miss. If I'm them, I don't want to play that schedule. That's a really, 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 really tough schedule, a tough way to end SEC play. So, those are some games to think about. With Kentucky, same way. They have LSU, Tennessee, South Carolina at the end of February going into March. Ole Miss has a tough schedule ending in February with Tennessee, South Carolina, and a road game against LSU. So, again, Natalie, the SEC is just a really tough conference. And what you get is what you get. You're going to get great teams. You're going to get great coaches, in most cases, coaching these teams. And you're going to get star power, and you're going to get some of the best basketball that you want to see when it comes to women's college basketball.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining me today. For our listeners, make sure you go check out Wilton on social media at Wilton Reports. Make sure you check out his SEC notebook every single Thursday. And, thanks to our listeners for making Locked On Women's Basketball your first listen every day. Make sure to tune in tomorrow to hear from our WNBA draft crew, and every Monday through Saturday for more women's basketball coverage.